Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Jeremiah chapters 40 through 45 as we see the events after the fall of Jerusalem. Here's the outline we've been using of Jeremiah. Notice we begin with the call of Jeremiah, look down at the end, we have the fall of Jerusalem. But the center point, wedged in between these prophecies of Judah, of Jerusalem, and prophecies of other nations, the center point is this historical narrative. You see that in the middle, where it has part of the fall of Jerusalem, then the fall that takes place in the earth in chapter 39. But what we're looking at are the events right after that, after the fall of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem fell in chapter 39. Now the story continues. Chapter 40, verse 1. The word which came to Jeremiah from the Lord after Nebuzaradan, captain of the bodyguard, had released him from Ramah, when he had taken him bound in chains among all the exiles of Jerusalem and Judah who were being exiled to Babylon. Um, we read in the previous chapter that Jeremiah had been treated well, but that didn't happen, now we find out, immediately. There was a little bit of confusion in the fall of Jerusalem where people were bound in chains, and Jeremiah was as well. Verse 2, now the captain of the bodyguard had taken Jeremiah and said to him, the Lord your God promised this calamity against this place, and the Lord has brought it on and done just as he promised. Now, makes me wonder, how had the captain of the bodyguard heard about the preaching of Jeremiah? We don't know. But he continues, because you people sinned against the Lord and did not listen to his voice, therefore this thing happened to you. It almost sounds like the captain of the bodyguard is a student of the word and student of Jeremiah and has heard what he said. Maybe he didn't know him by face. After all, they're from different parts of the world. But he had taken Jeremiah and he says, everything you said as a prophet came to pass. Verse 4, but now behold, I am freeing you today from the chains which are on your hands. And so here he's going to be set free. And then he gives him a choice. If you would prefer to come with me to Babylon, come along, and I will look after you. But if you would prefer not to come with me to Babylon, never mind. Look, the whole land is before you. Go wherever it seems good and right for you to go. So he's given a choice: go to Babylon or stay here. And Jeremiah is going to choose to stay here. Verse 5, as Jeremiah was still not going back, he said, go on back then to Gedaliah, the son of Hikam, the son of Shaphan, whom the king of Babylon has appointed over the cities of Judah, and stay with him among the people. Or else go anywhere it seems right for you to go. In other words, that you have complete free will, Jeremiah. Go where you like. One option is to go and be under the authority of Gedaliah. It's dangerous to just go out and be on your own. You might be captured and made a slave or something like that. But Gedaliah had been placed in charge of what was left, and there wasn't a lot left. Jerusalem was destroyed, its walls torn down. But Gedaliah had been placed in charge by the king of Babylon and appointed over what remained of those places, cities in Jerusalem. And you can go stay there. So the captain of the bodyguard gave him a ration and a gift, something to eat, and let him go. Verse 6, then Jeremiah went to Mizpah to Gedaliah. Now, Mizpah is a place a few miles, probably about, I'm guessing, about 10 miles to the north of Jerusalem. Where Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, and stayed with him among the people who were left in the land. So that becomes a gathering point of of the remnants, the people that are left. Notice not every single person is going to be removed from the land. There were people that are still in the land. This is not the high and mighty. This is the low, and these are sort of the people that no one wants. Verse 7, now all the commanders of the forces that were in the field and their men heard that the king of Babylon had appointed Gedaliah, son of Hikam, over the land, and that he had put him in charge of the men, women, and children, those of the poorest of the land who had not been exiled to Babylon. So when we read about all the commanders of the forces, now here's a kal sareh. The kal is just the word for all. But Sareh is normally we normally translate all the princes of the forces that were in the field. Um, and that's a term that reminds us that maybe there are some, not just the lowest of low, but some that were of the Jewish nobility that perhaps had escaped and managed to still be in the land. And they had heard that this Gedaliah was now over the land, and they're not necessarily going to be in favor of him. They would look at him as somebody that Nebuchadnezzar had appointed, Nebuchadnezzar who had brought destruction on the land, Nebuchadnezzar who had taken all the high families and all the regular families and all the craftsmen away from the land, had left the land destitute and desolated. So Gedaliah had been told, he's told in verses 8 through 11, serve Babylon, tend your fields, and you can live in the land. You know, you and the people that are there. And Gedaliah is telling the people, he's relating this from the king of Babylon. He doesn't want to. The king of Babylon doesn't want to come back again. He's already come 3 times and captured Jerusalem, captured again, captured it a third time. This time destroyed it. No more of that. Just tend to your fields, pay your taxes, and just be here in the land. And we read in verse 12, then all the Jews returned from all the places to which they had been driven away and came to the land of Judah, to Gedaliah at Mizpah, and gathered in wine and summer fruit in great abundance. Actually, things, at least from that summer, from that fall, look like they're going okay. Looks like, okay, we've been reduced to the very poorest of areas, but hey, we're still here and we're gathering fruit and we're eating and life goes on. Now, in verses 13 through 16, a plot to kill Gedaliah is reported to him. And he hears of this plot. The plot is coming from the king of Ammon, across on the other side of the Jordan River, who, for reasons of his own, possibly because he doesn't like Jewish people, and they have been traditional enemies in the past, and now he sees his chance to take his vengeance upon someone. For whatever reason, there is a plot to kill Gedaliah, and Gedaliah hears about it, and he says, no, I'm popular, Nebuchadnezzar likes me, I don't have to worry about such things. And it's reported and ignored. So verse 14, are you well aware that Baalis, this is the king of the sons of Ammon, the king of Ammon, and notice what he's called, the king of the sons of Ammon. That's an interesting title. We actually see this in archaeology. Has sent, and here's the details of the plot, has sent Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, to take your life, but Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, did not believe them. And so he hears the report and he dismisses it. Now, we have actually found a seal. A seal is when you take this image that's set in stone and you push it into clay and it leaves your mark. So you actually have to when you put it in, it has to be reversed. The Hebrew that you see is actually backwards, which is sort of funny for us because we write Hebrew from right to left instead of from left to right. But in this case, it's actually backwards, and because it has to be stamped into the clay. And in this inscription, he's called king of Bnei of Ammon, that is, king of the sons of Ammon. So the same title that we see here in this passage that is described of him. Well, the plot, because Gedaliah doesn't believe it, he doesn't take any safeguards against it, and the plot is carried out by Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah. He's an Ammonite, and so he's doing this on behalf of the king of the sons of Ammon, and Gedaliah is killed. And the people say, what's going to happen now? And so there's an attempt made by those that had been following Gedaliah. There's an attempt to capture Ishmael. He's actually captured some hostages, and he's going to kill all of them. And some of them say, well, wait, we have some of the summer fruit. We have some food. It's hidden away. You can have that. And so that they sort of bribe their way out of being killed. And And so they come to rescue those people that he has taken captive, and they do rescue them, but Ishmael and some of his followers escape. And so the one who did the deed, they can't hold him and say, look, he's the one who did the deed. And meanwhile, the report is going to go back to Babylon that there's been another revolt. Maybe that was the plan all along, but another revolt, and Gedaliah, who Nebuchadnezzar had put in charge, that he has now been killed. Verse 17, and they went and stayed in Geruth Kimham, which is beside Bethlehem. Bethlehem's not mentioned a lot in the Old Testament, but here's one of the references to that little town about 4 or 5 miles south of Jerusalem. And they go there, notice, in order to proceed into Egypt. They've decided we're not going to stay here, because if we stay here, then Nebuchadnezzar is going to come and kill all the rest of us. So we're going to run to Egypt, verse 18, because of the Chaldeans, for they were afraid of them, since Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, had struck down Gedaliah, the son of Hakim, whom the king of Babylon had appointed over the land. So it's explaining the reason for that. So the Jews now come to Jeremiah, and they say, Jeremiah, you have an inside track with the Lord. You're a prophet. Go to the Lord and find out, should we stay here or should we run to Egypt? And what they say, here it is, verse 5, then they said to Jeremiah, may the Lord be a true and faithful witness against us if we do not act in accordance with the whole message with which the Lord your God will send you to us. You go to the Lord and find out what we should do, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. The Hebrew is whether it is good or whether it is evil, but not evil in the moral sense, unpleasant, like we don't like it. Here's the promise. We will listen to the voice of the Lord our God, to whom we are sending you, so that it may go well with us when we listen to the voice of the Lord our God. And so they're promising, you tell us what God says, we will listen to it. We'll do whatever God says. Those are, when you say those words, you need to make sure that you're going to follow through. And so verse 7, the word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah after 10 days, doesn't happen immediately. And God says, stay here. Don't go. Don't run to Egypt. Egypt is going to be a bad place to go, because Nebuchadnezzar is going to come after Egypt, and Egypt is going to have its own, all of its own share of problems. You think you're going to see bad times, a famine or something like that. Egypt is going to have some bad times. It might not happen immediately, but it's going to happen. And the people accused Jeremiah of lying and plotting their demise. Jeremiah, you're only saying that so that we can be destroyed at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, because you said you were sort of pro Nebuchadnezzar all this time, and so you're lying. We're going to go to Egypt anyway. Wait a minute. They promised to do whatever God said, and now they're saying, well, God didn't say that, because they don't like the message that came down. Have you ever seen that, where someone will say, I'm going to try to follow God, and then God says, maybe in his word, he said, well, I don't like that part, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to assume that that's not true, that somebody else wrote that's not, I'm going to reinterpret it. And they decide to move away from what God specifically said. And so the Jews depart from the land to flee to Egypt. That's in chapter 43, verses 4 through 7. And when we get to chapter 44, now that they are in Egypt, and notice Jeremiah is with them, did they force him to go, or did he go just so that he could give one last message? He warns the Jews living in Egypt against worshiping Egyptian gods and goddesses. And they respond, and it's not just the men, it's also the women respond with their resolve to continue in their worship of this one that they refer to as the Queen of Heaven. Now, that seems to be one of the Egyptian goddesses. But it strikes me, and I don't want to make this by way of interpretation, because it's not, but by way perhaps of a very loose application, that my Roman Catholic friends have taken this title of a pagan goddess, that's what it was back then, and have applied it, I believe they have misapplied it to the Virgin Mary, that Roman Catholics like to refer to as the Queen of Heaven. And I don't want to say anything bad about the Virgin Mary. God blessed her and used her in a wonderful way. But to give her a title like that perhaps is saying far too much and is a inappropriate designation. Well, let's finish up with our passage, chapter 44, verse 30. Thus says the Lord, behold, I'm going to give over Pharaoh Hophra, and we actually know a bit about him. We'll talk about him in a minute. Let's finish the passage first. King of Egypt, into the hands of his enemies, to the hand of those who seek his life, just as I gave over Zedekiah, king of Judah, to the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, who was his enemy and was seeking his life. And so the point is made, and this Pharaoh Hophra, he's also known as Apries. He's from the Saite dynasty. That is the dynasty of kings that actually come from Libya to the west of Egypt. This is a point in history where Egypt was being ruled over by by latecomers, by people that weren't actually from Egypt, and his own troops actually turned against him and they arrest him and he is executed. Dies a very ignoble, a very poor death. Um, and so the prophecy is fulfilled. Now, there's a contrast as we leave. Contrast is between the Jews in Jeremiah's day and Jesus that we see, hundreds of years later. And the thing that drew my attention to it is when they were assembled near Bethlehem. As I said, Bethlehem isn't mentioned a lot in the Old Testament. And of course, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And so these series of contrasts and parallels, and maybe this is just by happenstance, but remember how the Jews are told by God not to go to Egypt, and Joseph, the father of Jesus, is told by God to flee with Jesus to Egypt. It's sort of a interesting contrast, both taking place in and around Bethlehem. And the Jews in Jeremiah's day sought refuge with Pharaoh Hophra. In the case of Jesus, he sought refuge from Herod the Great, not seeking to be hidden by Herod, but actually Herod was out to kill him. Remember that story in Matthew chapter 2. In Jeremiah's day, Pharaoh Hophra was overthrown and killed by his own people. Now, Herod the Great was not killed by his own people, but he did die shortly thereafter after having a number of his own sons executed, and one was actually still in prison and due to be executed when Herod finally died. In Jeremiah's day, the Jews who fled to Egypt never returned to the land. Now, we're going to see later Jews in Egypt. I'm not sure if that's the same people that were that went there now. Don't want to say because I don't know for sure. But I don't see a return, and Jeremiah predicts that they're going to go down to Egypt. They're not coming back. Whereas in Jesus' case, he was brought back to the land after the death of Herod. Um, in Jeremiah's day, is a story of being scattered, and the story of Jesus is a story that calls for a regathering. And Jesus himself said, "And I, if I'm lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself." Are you part of that regathering story? There's an invitation there, if you will turn to him, to be regathered to the Lord.